Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a puzzle that trips up so many businesses. When is making more money not actually a sign of success? We're about to solve a really interesting productivity puzzle that changes how we think about what a win really looks like. So, let me just ask you this right off the bat. Are higher sales always a good thing? I mean, your gut reaction is probably, of course, more sales means more money in the bank. The business is growing. What's not to love? Well, as we're about to see, the real story is a little more complicated than that. All right, to make this real, let's talk about Joe. Joe's just bought a pizza franchise, and on the surface, things are looking amazing. But when he starts digging into the numbers, he finds this little puzzle that he just can't seem to figure out on his own. Okay, so take a look at this. The story here is fascinating. His sales jumped from 52 grand in June to almost 60 grand in July. That's fantastic, right? But hang on, look closer. His food costs went up, which makes sense. But his labor cost? Wow, that really shot up. So the big question is Joe's Pizzeria actually doing any better? To find the real answer, to see what's actually happening behind the scenes, we need a special kind of tool. And that tool is the productivity formula. This is how you measure the true performance of an operation. At its heart, it's a really simple but powerful idea. Productivity is just your outputs divided by your inputs. Now, it's what we call a relative measure, which is just a fancy way of saying its real magic appears when you start comparing it over time. So let's break down what outputs and inputs even mean for Joe's Pizza Place. Okay, the output? That's the easy part. It's just what you make. In this case, since Joe sells all kinds of different pizzas, drinks, and sides, the best way to measure his output is the total dollar value of everything he sold. Simple enough, it's his total sales. And the inputs? Well, those are all the things you have to use up to create that output. For Joe, his biggest inputs are pretty obvious. The cost of his ingredients, the dough, the cheese, the toppings, and of course, the money he spends paying his staff. That's his labor cost. All right, so to really see how this works in practice, let's just focus on one of those inputs for a second. We're going to zoom right in and calculate Joe's labor productivity. Okay, now check this out. In June, for every single dollar Joe spent on paying his employees, he generated $4.55 in sales. Not bad. But in July, even with those higher sales, that number dropped all the way down to $4. He's actually getting less bang for his buck from his team. And that, right there, is the first big clue in our puzzle. And when you actually run the numbers on the percent change, the picture gets even sharper. His labor productivity didn't just dip a little bit, it absolutely plummeted by over 12% in just 1 month. That is a massive drop in efficiency. So what does this actually tell Joe? Well, it's screaming that his labor costs are growing way, way faster than his sales are. Yeah, the pizzeria might be busier, but his team is actually becoming less efficient at turning their work hours into real revenue. But hold on, just looking at one thing, like labor, only gives us one piece of the story. To really get a handle on the health of the business, we have to zoom out and look at the whole shebang. So what we just did with labor, that's called single-factor productivity. It's awesome for diagnosing a very specific problem. But to see the overall health, we need something called multifactor productivity, which, just like it sounds, pulls all the key inputs together into one number. And here it is. This is probably the biggest surprise of all. When we add up all the inputs, the food, the labor, and his other overhead costs, and divide the sales by that total, we get the exact same number for both months, $1.70. What? His overall productivity hasn't changed at all. So what in the world is going on here? How is it possible that his labor productivity tanked, but his total productivity is completely flat? This is where we uncover the real story hiding in the data. As our source material says, a single productivity number doesn't really mean that much by itself. The real power comes from the comparison. It's the change from one period to the next that tells you everything you need to know about what's really happening inside your business. And this chart just lays it all out perfectly. Look, while his labor productivity fell off a cliff by 12%, his food cost productivity actually improved by over 7%. He was getting more sales for every dollar he spent on ingredients. And these two big changes, they almost perfectly canceled each other out. Which brings us right to that final mind-bending number, 0%. No change in total productivity.
But this 0 isn't telling us that nothing happened. It's telling us that a huge shift was happening just beneath the surface.
So here's the bottom line. Joe's business is just as productive overall as it was before, but how he's achieving that productivity has completely changed. He's gotten way less efficient with his people, but he's gotten more efficient with his pepperoni and cheese.
The best way to think about this is that productivity isn't a report card. It's more like an X-ray for your business. It lets you see inside the operation and pinpoint the exact source of what's working and what's broken. So how can you actually use this? It's really just a simple 3-step loop. First, you have to measure your key inputs and outputs consistently. Second, you compare those numbers over time to see what's changing. And third, and this is the most important part, you use those insights to take action. And for Joe, the takeaways are crystal clear. He knows that whatever he did with his food suppliers, he needs to keep doing it. But more importantly, he now knows he's got a fire to put out with his labor efficiency. He can stop guessing what the problem is because the data is telling him exactly where to look. And that is the ultimate lesson here. Productivity isn't about getting a high score to brag about. It's a diagnostic tool. It's all about understanding that relationship between what you put in and what you get out, so you can make smarter and smarter decisions. So I'll leave you with this question to think about. Whether it's in your business, in your studies, or even in your personal life, what's the most important thing you could be more productive at? And how would you even begin to measure it? Thanks for joining this explainer.